Artillery is the god of war. That statement was made over half a century ago and still remains relevant to this day. In today's video, we'll be talking about the self-propelled artillery pieces that the foreign allies of the armed forces of Ukraine have shared with them and evaluate their impact on the effectiveness of the fight against the Russian occupiers. One of the first countries to come to the aid of the Ukrainians in these dark times was their closest neighbor, Poland. Assessing the seriousness of this tragic event and realizing the need for the lightning-fast suppression of this aggressor country, the Polish authorities and their people transferred more than $1.7 billion worth of weapons to Ukraine as soon as they could. In addition to 200 T-72 tanks, man-pads, Soviet 2S-1, and other types of weapons, the military aid package included the AHS Crab self-propelled tracked howitzers. These 155mm giants are sort of combined essence, with the South Korean K9 Thunder chassis, the British AS-90M Braveheart turret with a .52 caliber barrel, and the Topaz artillery fire control system from WB Electronics. At the same time, the first 8 Crab self-propelled howitzers used the locally produced Obram UPG-NG chassis from Bumar, equipped with the S-12U engine and other elements such as road wheels from the Polish PT-91 Twardy MBT. But due to various design features, cracks, and the discontinuation of the S-12U engines, the UPG-NG was abandoned rather quickly. The Crab has a fire rate of 6 rounds per minute and an effective range of approximately 19 miles, which can be further extended to a maximum of 25 miles. At the end of May, Warsaw allocated 18 such guns to Ukraine, subsequently signing a contract for the supplier of another 60 Crabs worth $700 million, making Ukraine the first export buyer of Polish self-propelled guns. This agreement was Poland's largest defense contract in the last few decades. The Czech Republic decided it would not stand idle, also moving to actively transfer the necessary weapons over to Ukraine, among which there was a place not only for anti-tank weapons, combat helicopters, and armored personnel carriers, but also for the VZ-77 Dana self-propelled guns. This self-propelled artillery piece was created back in 1977 in Czechoslovakia and adopted by the local army. The name was not chosen by chance either, since in Czech, Dana is an abbreviation meaning vehicular gun with automatic loading. The system was created as an equivalent to the Soviet 2C3 Akatsiya, but not without its own unique features. One of them being that it was the first wheeled 152mm SPG to enter service, and then there's its innovative loading system. The advantage of wheeled vehicles was not only the lower cost and greater mobility on the battlefield, but also ease of construction and maintenance. The tire pressure can be adjusted for excellent off-road capability, and the front 4 wheels were equipped with power steering. When firing, the self-propelled gun lowers 3 hydraulic stabilizers into the ground, and a crane mounted on the roof makes the process of loading ammunition easier. The Dana armored turret is mounted on a swivel mount adapted to a Tatra 815 8x8 wheeled chassis, divided into 2 halves by a howitzer recoil mechanism and a reciprocating firing trajectory. The left half of the turret is occupied by the gunner and the first loader. It contains fire control optics, electromechanical guidance controls, an automatic propellant feeder, and an auxiliary ammunition magazine. In the right half, there is a mechanized projectile delivery system controlled by the second loader. Dana's primary force is the 152mm howitzer with a monolithic barrel and a fixed rifling pitch equipped with a single expansion chamber. It has a semi-automatic, wedge-shaped vertically sliding gate, and the recoil assembly consists of a hydraulic buffer, 2 pneumatic return cylinders, and a control plunge mechanism that regulates the displacement of the buffering system. The gun's aiming occurs either through an electro-hydraulic drive system or emergency manual control. The 3 types of ammunition used as projectiles are 152 EOF, high explosive fragmentation rounds with a range of 11 miles, 152 EOFD, high explosive long-range fragmentation rounds with a maximum effective range of up to 12 miles, 152 EPRSV, high explosive anti-tank rounds used for direct fire on armored targets. In the absence of a gyroscopic or similar system for independent automated and autonomous aiming of the gun, the ACS gunner can use the ZZ-73 panoramic telescope with a PG-1MD collimator for indirect aiming of the gun. If direct fire is needed, then the gun uses the OP5-38D optical sight. Around 2020-2021, Ukraine had already tried to acquire 26 Dana M2 howitzers. However, due to the inflated price, it was decided to freeze the contract. And now here we are, talking about the gratuitous provision of these weapons by the Czech Republic. Ukraine was given both the basic versions of the VZ-77 Dana and the modified Dana M2, which were improved by the Excalibur Army back in 2017. These received a more durable cockpit, numerous improvements to the controls, navigation, aiming and fire control systems, as well as an updated module for diagnostics, communications, and backup systems. The eastern flank of NATO has stood firm in defense of Ukraine's sovereignty against the backdrop of Russia's brazen attack. Slovakia, along with the Czech Republic and Poland, decided to support their neighbors by handing over domestic Zuzana 2 self-propelled howitzers to them. This self-propelled gun is one modification of the previously mentioned Dana. The design of the Zuzana 2 allows the use of any 155mm NATO standard ammunition, and the howitzer's fire control system allows operation in MRSI, multiple round simultaneous impact mode. Another unique feature of the Zuzana 2 is that the gun is mounted externally between 2 completely separated turret compartments. Because of this, the ACS crew is reliably protected from any potential danger associated with the mechanics of the gun and automatic loader, as well as gases generated during firing. Unlike its predecessors, the Zuzana 2 received a new 52 caliber gun with an effective range of 25 miles, a rate of fire of up to 6 rounds per minute, and a 360-degree turret. Additionally, the platform was equipped with a new armored cab, thus improving automation. As a result, the required ACS crew was reduced to a mere 3 people. In April of 2022, Ukraine began negotiations on the purchase of 16 Zuzana 2s. Just a month later, Slovakia officially announced the transfer of 8 such self-propelled guns to Ukraine, which are now already clearing out Ukrainian land from the Russian invaders. The next self-propelled gun from our list was transferred to Ukraine not only by the United States, which is the birthplace of this self-propelled gun, but also by Norway and Belgium. Although in the case of the latter, we're talking more about the UK, which bought 20 of these howitzers from a Belgian private defense company, fixed them up a bit, then transferred them into the capable hands of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. We're speaking of none other than the legendary M109. The history of this self-propelled gun began a little earlier than that of previous applicants. It was created back in the 1960s to replace the less successful M44 predecessor. This self-propelled gun from BAE Systems Land and Armaments very quickly gained popularity among U.S. troops, winning the title of the standard self-propelled gun, having displaced even the M108, which was created in parallel with it. The hull and turret of the M109 are made from rolled aluminum armor, providing protection against fire, small arms, and field artillery shell fragments. Depending on the modification, the armament of the M109 can consist of M126, M185, or M284 155mm guns. It is further complicated by an M2 12.7mm machine gun, a 40mm Mk19 Mod 3 automatic grenade launcher, and either a 7.62mm M60, M240, or an L4 machine gun. Additionally, in 2016, the U.S. Army tested out the ultra-high-speed projectiles with this self-propelled gun, originally developed for use by U.S. Navy electromagnetic railguns. As a result, it was found that they greatly increased the effective range of the howitzer. Also, the Army decided to consider using the M109 Paladin to fire HVPs as an anti-ballistic missile defense, since traditional anti-missile interceptors are much more expensive. Just to clarify, the usual firing range is about 13 miles, and the maximum with Excalibur ammunition is about 25 miles. But when using HVP, it increases considerably, for self-propelled guns at least, going out to 58 miles. Ukraine received about 20 basic M109 self-propelled guns and 22 Norwegian M109 A3GN. The latter was developed back in the early 1990s, and the main difference between the M109 A3GN modification and its previous versions is the new Rheinmetall barrels, which increased the overall firing range. Western European countries, as well as Eastern Europeans, supported Ukraine in the first days of the war. And although the supply of heavy weapons is still far from ideal in terms of volume, there's definitely been a start to it all. France was one of the first countries to transfer its highly efficient Caesar self-propelled guns to the armed forces of Ukraine. And and just like the Czechoslovakian Dana, the abbreviation also found its place. In French, Caesar stands for a truck equipped with an artillery system. This 155mm self-propelled gun was developed by the French company Nexter, formerly known as Giat Industries. The ancestor of Caesar was the TRF-1 towed gun and GCT AUF-1 self-propelled howitzer developed in the early 1980s. But decades later, the relevance of towed guns has only decreased, so all the production efforts were put into the development of autonomous howitzers. The basis of the howitzer is the Renault Sherpa 5 chassis with a 6x6 wheel formula, and the export versions are integrated with either the Unimog U2 450L 6x6 or Tatra 815 8x8 chassis. The Caesar's force is concentrated into a 155mm cannon, which accommodates 18 rounds at a rate of fire of 6 rounds per minute. It has a standard effective range of about 26 miles with ERFB, extended range full-bore projectiles, which can be further extended to 31 miles using rocket projectiles. Due to the howitzer's compact nature, it can be quickly transferred to mission areas by Lockheed C-130 Hercules and Airbus A400M Atlas aircraft. A computerized system with automatic control based on the Sigma 30 inertial navigation system is responsible for the accuracy of the howitzer. In February of 2022, Nexter received a contract to develop a new generation Caesar 6x6 Mark II artillery system, equipped with a more powerful 460 horsepower engine, a new automatic transmission, updated software, and a level 2 armored cab, which increased the weight of the car to 25 tons. Shortly after the Russian invasion, France handed over 12 Caesars to the armed forces of Ukraine, and in June it announced the dispatching of 6 more such guns. With the help of an advanced navigation system and the ability to shoot according to the maneuver-shoot-maneuver principle, Ukrainian soldiers have more than once covered their would-be conquerors with volleys from these French self-propelled guns, all without staying in one position and deploying said howitzers in no more than 5 minutes' time. As one of the most influential countries in Western Europe, Germany could not simply stand by either. Despite the noticeable reluctance of its authorities to supply heavy weapons in the first months of the war, today the armed forces of Ukraine are already testing the Panzerhaubitze 2000 they've received, also known as the PZH 2000. This self-propelled howitzer was created for the Bundeswehr by 2 companies simultaneously, Krauss-Maffei-Wegmann and Rheinmetall. Together, they managed to present to the world one of the most powerful artillery systems in existence. This SPG's chassis and turret are based on components from the Leopard 2, allowing it to achieve superior cross-country ability with solid tracks and impressive protection against oncoming fire. The PZH 2000 compares favorably with its iron counterparts in its high rate of fire, firing 3 shots in 9 seconds and 10 shots in 56 seconds. At the same time, depending on the barrel's rate of overheating, these self-propelled guns are capable of continuously firing from 10 to 13 rounds per minute. Like the Slovak Zuzana II, the PZH 2000 works well with the MRSI mode, and the reloading process is perfectly automated. 2 operators can load 60 projectiles and propellants into it in less than 12 minutes. Rheinmetall also developed a JB-MOU-compatible 155mm rifled gun with full-length chrome cladding and a muzzle brake on the end. The howitzer can use a new modular system with 6 charges that can be combined to provide a more optimized total charge power. The maximum range of the PZH 2000 with the standard DM121 boat tail round is up to 19 to 22 miles. With base bleed rounds, it's about 25 to 29 miles, and about 42 miles with M205 VLAP rounds. Additionally, the gun is capable of firing smart 155 high-precision artillery ammunition, which consists of 2 cluster sub-munitions that have a cumulative part to them. In April 2022, the Weld publication announced the possible sale of 100 PZH 2000s to Ukraine, along with a training kit and spare parts for a total of $1.73 billion. However, these deliveries can take place no earlier than 30 months after the signing of the contract, and the weapons are needed now. For this reason, Germany made an agreement with the Netherlands to transfer 5 Dutch self-propelled guns with German ammunition to Ukraine, and also trained Ukrainian soldiers in advance to work with the system. A little later, German authorities announced that they would send 7 self-propelled guns from the Bundeswehr stocks after making the necessary repairs. As a result, by the end of June, the Ukrainian Minister of Defense, Oleksiy Reznikov, announced that the first PZH 2000s had begun to scorch the Russian invaders. What do you think? What guns could accompany these howitzers on the battlefield? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification button so you never miss another video just like today's. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one. There are already HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems in Ukraine, and the results of their application are quite impressive. How exactly will they facilitate the Ukrainian army launching a counteroffensive? What other MLRS should the country expect from its allies in the near future? The answers to these and more are in today's video. Let's dive in. A multiple launch rocket system is a complex consisting of a launcher with multiple charges, projectiles, and other auxiliary components, such as transport or transport loading vehicles and such. The primary purpose of such guns is to combat armored vehicles and infantry dispersed over a large area, as well as the destruction of strategic enemy infrastructure like an airstrip. Although there are several types of MLRS, modular or container multiple launch rocket systems are rightfully considered the most powerful. These are able to shoot several types of shells at once, are easier to upgrade, and their reloading takes 10 times less time than their tubular predecessors. Among this type, the most advanced MLRS today are the American M142 HIMARS and its big brother, the M270 MLRS. Let's start with the latter, since it was this one that became the cornerstone of this family of weapons. The US began actively looking at the MLRS after the 1973 Yom Kippur War, when they were assessing the effectiveness of the Israeli army destroying enemy forces via MLRSs. Realizing that in the event of a large-scale war in Europe, such weapons would play an important role. The U.S. Army had, by 1974, formulated requirements for a new rocket launcher called the General Support Rocket System, or GSRS. The project piqued the interest of America's allies in the NATO bloc, among other entities, since they had already tried to previously create such weapons. By joining forces, the result of many hours of work from specialists all over the world was not long in coming. Boeing and Vought Aerospace were overall responsible for the development of the MLRS. Production models first appeared in 1982, and the initial battery of operational M270s was formed just a year later. By that time, the gun had received the name much more familiar to most of us, the M270 MLRS Self-Propelled Loading Launcher, or SPLL. This platform consists of three subsystems: the M269 Loading Launch Module, the Electronic Fire Control System, and the M993 Transport Vehicle, a derivative of the Bradley chassis. One M270, firing 12 M26 rockets, dropped a 7,728 bomb payload equivalent. Just one battery of such MLRS can reach an incredible firepower equivalent to 33 Canyon artillery battalions. The MLRS strikes enemies with missiles housed in two interchangeable containers or modules, each of which can hold 6 M26 or GMLRS missiles, 2 of the latest PRSM missiles, or 1 ground-to-ground ATACMS. Shells can be launched both individually or in volleys of 2 to 12, depending on the task at hand. The M26 missiles underwent trial by fire during Operation Desert Storm in 1991, having made it possible to hit targets at a distance of up to 20 miles. With their improved versions, the M26A1 and M26A2 worked at a distance of up to 28 miles. But this was not without its downsides. These missiles are unguided, so one cannot necessarily talk about high precision here. As a more modern-looking missile, the M31 GMLRS takes the M270 to the next level. These GPS-enabled precision-guided missiles were used extensively by the U.S. Army during the Iraq War. While remaining out of reach of enemy artillery, launchers with M31 GMLRS missiles hit forward command posts, clusters of enemy equipment, and cannon artillery at coordinates transmitted from counter-battery radars and aerial reconnaissance equipment. The effective range of the GMLRS sits anywhere between 9.3 and 55.9 miles, depending on the type of ammunition used. For example, Germany put the M31 into service with a range of up to 55.9 miles, and Lockheed Martin at the beginning of 2021 tested the new ER GMLRS capable of covering a distance of 93 miles. Granted, operational readiness by 2025 is really the idea in mind regarding production of the latter, and Finland has already become the first foreign customer to declare its intention to purchase this ammunition. Most of all, the enemy should fear the M270, loaded with guided missiles from the ATACMS family, capable of hitting targets at a distance of 86.9 to 186.4 miles. These literally transform the M270 and M142 from multiple launch rocket systems into tactical systems with a range greater than that of the Soviet Tochka-U or the Ukrainian Vilka MLRS. In the future, MLRSs will also acquire even more impressive smart missiles, precision strike missile. The series of GPS-guided missiles will replace ATACMS from 2024. These are equipped with a new area warhead and can strike the enemy at a distance of 37.2 to 310 miles. But to date, PRSM missiles are still in the initial production stage. The first batch of 110 missiles is set to be transferred to the U.S. military within a year, with approval planned to take place in 2023. Although apparently deliveries of the M270 to Ukraine have already started. Not too long ago, members of the Armed Forces of Ukraine shared a photo with the MLRS M270 in it. What we most likely saw in the photo was 2 of the 3 MLRS transferred by the UK. Given that Britain has its own MLRS modification, AFU soldiers might possibly acquire a version of the M270B1, similar to the M270A1, but with improved crew protection armor. According to the agreements between Norway and Britain, the latter took on transferring the GPS-enhanced M270 to Ukraine in return for upgrading the decommissioned Norwegian MLRS. Additionally, let's not forget about the recent promise of Germany to supply its own versions of the M270, the Mars 2 MLRS-E. The German version of the MLRS can fire up to 12 unguided 230mm rockets per minute, and the European Fire Control System integrated into the installation allows the launch of GMLRS missiles, expanding the base range of the MLRS from 31 to 43.5 miles. Other differences between the Mars 2 and the standard M270 include a fully automatic nitrogen fire suppression system and the new electrical launch drive system from Krauss-Maffei-Wegmann. Having replaced the hydraulic ones, the cost of future maintenance on the installations was significantly reduced. In June of this year, German Defense Minister Christine Lambrecht announced the transfer of 3 Mars 2 with GMLRS missiles from the Bundeswehr warehouses. Taking into account the recently received PZH-2000 self-propelled guns and other assistance from the Germans, we can safely say that, along with France, Germany has revised its policy regarding the transfer of heavy weapons, prioritizing the safety of the civilian population of Ukraine and the protection of its sovereignty from Russian occupiers. Now that the main card's out in the open, time to show the trump card out. Successor to the M270, the M142 HIMARS is a lightweight MLRS developed in the late 1990s for the U.S. Army. Unlike the MLRS, the HIMARS can accommodate only 1 capsule with 6 GMLRS, 2 PRSM, or 1 ATACMS missiles mounted on a 5-ton truck of a new family of medium tactical vehicles. Simply put, this system's force is about 50% of the M270. However, in return, HIMARS offers high mobility, which today just fits perfectly into Ukrainian artillery firing on the principle of maneuver, fire, maneuver. Due to its modest dimensions, the M142 can be transported using the Lockheed C-130 Hercules. Furthermore, the system's short deployment time and quick firing of volleys allows one to quickly deploy it long before the enemy even thinks about striking back. On May 31, 2022, the White House announced the delivery of 4 M142 HIMARS with M31 GMLRS missiles for training purposes, with shipments increasing as hostilities develop. By June 23, the first HIMARS arrived in Ukraine. Since then, warehouses with weapons for the Russian invaders in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions can be seen from space, now that they're being lit up. Artillerymen of the Armed Forces of Ukraine have demonstrated high accuracy, hitting both multiple targets and individual strategically important ones located in Ukraine. As of July 10, Biden has confirmed the transfer of yet another package of military assistance to Ukraine amounting to $400 million. This one includes 4 more HIMARS, bringing the total number in service with the Armed Forces of Ukraine to 12 units. At the same time, the range of ammunition for the previously delivered MLRS was up to 43.5 miles, but now we are talking about an even greater distance. And although there's been no official data so far on the transfer of ATACMS projectiles, some media sources claim that we're looking at missiles with a range of more than 120 miles. Speaking about the MLRS being in the hands of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, it would be unfair not to mention the Ukrainian Army's own weapons and captured multiple rocket launchers inherited from the Russian invaders fleeing in a panic. The most popular MLRS in service with the ground forces of Ukraine are the BM-30 Smerch, of which the Ukraine has about 81, and the BM-27 Uragan, of which there are about 70 units. In fact, the Smerch is a continuation of the Uragan, with a key difference in the diameter of the ammunition used and the effective range. So while the maximum range of the BM-27 missiles is about 43 miles, the BM-30 goes out to about 74.5 miles. As for the differences in the shells used by the Soviet MLRS, the Uragan system is loaded with 220mm rockets launched from 16 tubes installed in the rear of the chassis. With the Smerch, we're talking about 12 launch tubes with 300mm rockets inside. In addition to Soviet copies, one should also not discount Ukraine's own developments, such as Vilka and Vilka-M. For the first time ever, this complex came to be known in January of 2016, and the first test fires were carried out in March of that same year. 3 years later, missiles were launched from the upgraded Vilka-M complex, which had improved fuel energy, improved control and navigation systems, and also a greater effective range, up to 80 miles. In just 48 seconds, the Vilka can fire a full salvo of 12 missiles capable of hitting a target at a distance of 43.5 to 125.5 miles. Although the latest version of the Vilka M2 missiles, which have an operating range of more than 120 miles, is still at the testing range and is not currently in operations with the armed forces of Ukraine. The Vilka missile's main feature is that their flight is corrected using 90 impulse engines located in several rows outside the control unit. According to representatives from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, the Vilka-M entered service with the Armed Forces of Ukraine in 2020, and in 2021, there were plans to begin mass production of missiles for these MLRS. At the start of March 2022, the creator of the complex, the GKKB Lush, reported to the General Staff of Ukraine that the domestic MLRS was used by Ukrainian fighters from the first day of the invasion by the Russian occupational forces and had landed about 50 well-aimed hits on enemy targets. In addition to their own stocks, according to Oryx, by April 2022, the armed forces of Ukraine managed to capture more than 1,000 armored vehicles from the invaders. Among them were those MLRS that the occupiers used while shelling the civilian housing and infrastructure. Thus, the total number of BM-21 Grad taken from the Russians was more than 20 units, one BM-27 Uragan, and one 2B-17 Tornado G, and 4 TOS-1A. With such a replenishment of ammunition for the guns already with the armed forces of Ukraine and the regular deliveries of missile systems from allies, Ukraine will be even more confident in turning the Russian invaders into fertilizer, clearing its territory of these monsters step by step. But what do you think? How many MLRS does Ukraine need to kick the Russian occupiers out of their lands? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell for more content like today's. See you in the next one. The war that broke out in Ukraine entered a new stage following the delivery of the powerful MLRS. Both HIMARS and MLRS M270s are already helping the armed forces of Ukraine effectively destroy the Russian occupying forces. But for a full transition into a true counteroffensive, Ukraine also needs systems capable of covering the sky over its cities. For this, we're looking at air defense systems that foreign partners have pledged to supply to Ukraine. And it's these that we'll be discussing in today's video. The key to a peaceful existence in any country that borders a terrorist state shouldn't be just a battle-ready army, but also powerful air defense systems. By their defiant actions in recent months, the Ukrainian army and its people have already proven that they're ready to destroy any enemy that dares set foot on their land. However, even with the massive efforts on the part of the Ukrainian artillerymen, the country still needs its own version of the Iron Dome to save the lives of its citizens. To this end, the United States has announced the delivery of 2 NASAMS anti-aircraft missile systems in its next package of military assistance, which amounts to $820 million. The Norwegian Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems is a short to medium-range air defense missile system. It's designed to identify and destroy aircraft, UAVs, helicopters, and most importantly, cruise missiles. The development of the system started back in the 1990s when Kongsberg Defence and Aerospace joined forces with its specialists from the Raytheon team and the Royal Norwegian Air Force. To date, the latest generation is the NASAMS-3, developed in the 2000s and commissioned in 2019. At the same time, the first version of the system entered service with Norway back in 1998, and just 2 years later, its creators announced NASAMS-2, which was put into operation in 2006. There's a near certainty that this assistance package from Washington implies the transfer of the second or third generation of NASAMS to Ukraine. This air defense combines the American MPQ-64 Sentinel X-band 3D air defense radar and AMRAAM air-to-air missiles with a Norwegian C4I command, control, communication, computers, and intelligence battle management system called FDC for Fire Distribution Center. Together, the FDC and the MPQ-64 3D radar form the Acquisition Radar and Control System, or ARCS. Each NASAMS launcher carries up to 6 AIM-120 AMRAAMS and is connected to the FDC command post via radio and/or a field cable. At the same time, the mobility of this air defense system lies in the fact that it can be deployed and remotely controlled at a distance of up to 15.5 miles from the control center. AMRAAM is launched from the board of a towed launcher with 6 missile containers, and the projectiles themselves have a horizontal range of anywhere between 15.5 to 24.8 miles. The installation can fire 6 AMRAAMS in a matter of seconds at 6 different targets, which ensures the destruction of multiple enemy targets simultaneously. The NASAMS battery consists of 12 LCHR launchers and can launch 72 rockets in a mere 12 seconds. The second-generation complex received support for Link 16, new radars with spread spectrum technology and variable speed of rotation. It was also set up with the MSP-500 electro-optical sensor from Rheinmetall, which has a laser rangefinder, a visual display, and an upgraded thermal camera. This has been used before to passively launch rockets. In the latest generation of NASAMS-3, engineers updated the Fire Distribution Center with ergonomic control panels and 3 large displays. And in addition to the AIM-120 AMRAAM, instruction of sorts was given on launching AIM-9X Sidewinder Block 2 and AMRAAM-ER short-range missiles. This made it possible to significantly expand the affected area, increasing the maximum range by 50% and the maximum height by 70%, which will further facilitate neutralizing fast, maneuvering targets. In 2021, Raytheon announced the integration of a new medium-range AESA S-band radar into NASAMS-3. This is the Ghost Eye MR, based on the Ghost Eye or LTAMDS technology previously developed for the MIM-104 Patriot. Just a year later, in March 2022, Raytheon also held a demonstration of how the HELWS, High Energy Laser Weapon System, would be connected to NASAMS to destroy a swarm of unmanned targets. Given that NASAMS were used to defend the airspace above the White House, one of the air defenses received by Ukraine will most likely be located in the heart of Kiev, or at least in the vicinity of the capital. An excellent addition to the Norwegian air defense could also be the German IRIS-T system, which Kiev will receive from Germany this autumn. More specifically, we are talking about the air defense IRIS-T SLM, one of the most modern developments of the German defense concern Diehl Defense. This is an improved version of the IRIS-T complex with homing air-to-air missiles, which entered service with Germany in 2005. The IRIS-T SLM, a SAM with vertical projectile launch, can be installed on manned 8x8 vehicles or other vehicles. The complex can carry 8 missiles in its containers, and it only takes about 10 minutes to fully deploy it. At the moment, there are 2 primary versions of this air defense system: IRIS-T SLS short range, IRIS-T SLM medium range. Another embodiment of the extended range missile systems, the IRIS-T SLX, is under development. This defense complex consists of missiles, a launcher, and an AESA all-weather 3D radar to monitor targets in a 360-degree radius and collect detailed data about them. Fire control is carried out with the help of TOC, equipped with advanced communications. As with NASAMS, the IRIS-T SLM embodies the principle of vehicle independence and high mobility. All the system's components are compatible both in size and fastening with standard containers that can easily be transported by air, road, rail, and ship. Due to the complex's flexible architecture, as well as its high tactical and strategic mobility, the air defense system now requires a crew of only 2 people. IRIS-T missiles are equipped with 25-pound or 11.4-kilogram high-explosive fragmentation warheads, an inertial navigation system, and GPS. The RF data link allows it to send target data received in flight from the fire control radar, which gives it the advantage of long-range radar guidance. At the same time, the missile does not have its own tracking radar, millimeter wave radar. Therefore, enemy aircraft have no chance of detecting and intercepting missiles via radar seeking. The IRIS-T SLM projectiles are powered by a single-stage, solid-propellant rocket engine equipped with an integrated thrust vector control system that guarantees the projectile maximum lateral acceleration immediately after launch. This provides the missile with the ability to hit targets at the shortest possible distances and also achieve a maximum range of 24.8 miles and an intercept altitude of 65,616 feet. Ukraine's ambassador to Germany, Andrei Melnik, said that the purchase of the first IRIS-T air defense system in the amount of $178 million was financed by the German government, and he added that Ukraine intends to purchase 10 such systems. Although the dates for the delivery of weapons are still rather vague, we're sincerely glad that the cowardly Russian pilots will have to stay even further from the Ukrainian border. Another of the most sought-after air defense systems to counter the Russian invasion is the American MIM-140 Patriot anti-aircraft missile system. As part of a $40 billion aid package, the United States may in fact transfer such weapons. Additionally, Ukraine has repeatedly shown interest in these before, talking about the speedy replacement of the Soviet S-300. The Patriot MIM-104 is Raytheon's legendary air defense system that has protected the airspace over U.S. forces for over 40 years. The development of this complex began back in the 1960s and was supposed to replace the MIM-14 Nike Hercules as the main air defense platform at medium and high altitudes, as well as the MIM-23 Hawk as a tactical defense platform at medium altitudes. In addition to this, the Patriot is a ballistic missile interception platform. Nowadays, this is considered a key role for the MIM-104. Serial production of the Patriot started in 1980, and by 1985 the first air defense missile was put into service. Unlike its predecessor, the Nike Hercules, the Patriot was truck-mounted and more mobile. The fire battery could take position and prepare for firing in less than an hour. The battery consisted of a phased array radar, a battle control post, an electric power source, an antenna mast group, communications relay group, and up to 8 launchers, each of which controlled 4 missiles. Like all medium to long-range air defense systems, Patriot missiles are radar-guided and rely on radar to provide airspace surveillance, target detection, classification, tracking, and targeting. The anti-aircraft version of the Patriot, the PAC-2, uses an AN/MPQ-53 radar system. AN/MPQ-65 radars were installed in a more advanced modification of the complex, the PAC-3. At the same time, both devices use passive electronically scanned radars that utilize flat arrays similar to those installed on Aegis cruisers or destroyers. The first series of Patriot missiles were about 7 feet long, had a range of 43 miles, and speeds in excess of Mach 3. This 2,000-pound monster had a 43-pound high-explosive fragmentation warhead, which effectively hit enemy aircraft and missiles by detonating in close proximity. But it was quickly replaced by an improved version of the PAC-1, which entered service in 1988. By 1990, when the Patriot's true test took place, an even more modern complex, the PAC-2, arrived just in time. It was deployed in the Middle East for use in the Gulf War, where it was considered to be the first bit of evidence that protection against ballistic missiles is actually possible. After evaluating the PAC-2's shortcomings, which were identified during operations on the battlefield, the PAC-3 was introduced, which included strike-to-kill technology. The latter destroys ballistic missile warheads with a direct blow, rather than an explosion at a distance. The PAC-3 missile is the same length as the PAC-3, but weighs 1/3 as much. Thanks to this, the launcher can accommodate as many as 16 PAC-3 missiles instead of just 4 PAC-2s. But the biggest difference between the PAC-2 and PAC-3 missiles is that the latter has a built-in radar transmitter and computer guidance, allowing it to hit targets more accurately and deal with chemical and biological warheads more effectively. Even if the United States doesn't want to transfer the Patriot, it may well carry out an air defense castling with NATO allies so that they, in turn, transfer their own air defense systems to Ukraine in exchange for American MIM-104s. For example, in April of 2022, Biden approved the delivery of Patriot systems to Slovakia so that it could send C-300 systems to Ukraine. After all, the American systems would still require a long time to learn and operate. At the same time, Ukrainian fighters are perfectly capable of controlling the S-300 and the Buk M1, as confirmed by the statistics in more than 50% of downed missiles during the entire period of Russian aggression. Today, most of the air defense systems with which Ukraine defends its skies are a modified version of the guns from the Soviet era. Among these are 100 S-300 batteries and an additional battery of Slovak guns, as well as more than 70 Buk M1s. The development of the S-300 started back in the late 1960s, and its main goal was to protect large, strategic facilities such as large cities. Over time, many variations and modifications of this complex appeared for the specific needs of one or another particular country. Among the main features of the air defense system, it's worth noting its stable operation in all weather conditions and its ability to engage up to 12 targets simultaneously. The S-300 regiment often consists of 4 batteries, which operate up to 48 launchers with 192 missiles on board. Ukrainian air defense systems do their job effectively against a large part of enemy targets and shoot down aircraft and ballistic missiles at a distance of 3 to 93 miles. At the same time, the complex is not limited by any minimum distance and can shoot down any target, be it 30 feet or 30 miles away. The development of the Buk started a little later, in 1972. However, age doesn't really matter when you're fighting an enemy who has most of their own guns from the same time era. The air defense system can be used for protecting troops and either tactically or even strategically important facilities, especially as part of either larger-scale use of air attack weapons or a tactical air defense module. The complex can simultaneously destroy up to 6 aerodynamic targets or missiles, while a regiment of such air defense systems can provide cover for an area ranging from 800 to 1,200 square kilometers. The Buk M1 sweep time is several times less than that of the S-300. 5 minutes versus 30 minutes. Furthermore, the transition from its standby to its working position takes no more than 20 seconds. But in terms of range, it is noticeably inferior to the S-300, shooting down targets at a distance of 2 to 22 miles and demonstrating an operating altitude of 100 to 72,000 feet. Although today, the number of air defenses in Ukraine is far from ideal, looking at how the United States and other allies regularly address the issue of transferring heavy weapons and other means of defense to this European country, I'd like to believe that before long the sky over Ukrainian cities will be under reliable protection and their lives will return to normal again. What do you think? How soon will Ukraine be able to create its own Iron Dome to defend against the army of a dictator who's clearly gone off the rails? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video enjoyable, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell for more content like today's. I'll see you in the next video. In previous videos, we have repeatedly emphasized that the era of tanks is fading and drones are hot on its heels. But when you're at war with an enemy whose technical equipment is dozens of years behind the West, the time still comes when you have to dust off these monsters and get going. Let's take a look at what kinds of tanks Western allies have in store to help Ukraine in its battle against the Russian invaders, and what advantage they'll give the Ukrainian Armed Forces on the battlefield. Why don't we start with the European country that has provided key support to Ukraine from literally the very first day of the Russians' insidious invasion. We're speaking, of course, about the colossal assistance that has come from Poland. By April 2022, the country has already received more than 2.5 million Ukrainian citizens seeking a safe place in these dark times, transferred almost the entire reserve of spare parts and weapons for MiG-29 fighters, signed the largest contract for the sale of 60 Crab self-propelled guns, and sent the country 100 armored personnel carriers and other weapons worth over $2 billion. Additionally, let's not forget about the agreement between Poland and Ukraine on a joint venture for the manufacture of military equipment, as well as 240 T-72M1 and T-72M1R tanks transferred from previous service. Although the USSR began producing these giants back in 1969, Poland and Czechoslovakia were still able to produce the T-72 at home thanks to a license granted to the Warsaw Pact countries, among which the T-72 was the most common combat vehicle up until the collapse of the USSR in 1991. The tanks that rolled off the assembly line in Poland and Czechoslovakia were of better and more consistent workmanship than the original. However, in return, they were left without composite armor, which greatly affected the weight of the already not-so-weighty vehicle, decreasing it from 41.5 tons to 37 tons. Various T-72 modifications have been produced for decades, during which the characteristics of its armor have changed a lot. The original tanks had uniformly cast steel armor using shielded armor technology and were relatively well protected by the early 1970s standards. By 1979, the USSR began building a T-72 modification with composite armor, similar to that of the T-64 in the front of the turret and hull, and by late 1980s, the T-72s, which were in service not only with the USSR but also with other world countries, were equipped with elements of reactive armor. The TPD-K1 laser rangefinder complex appeared in the T-72 starting in 1974. Earlier models were equipped with an optical parallax rangefinder which was impossible to use at a distance of less than 1,100 yards, and even despite the innovation available, in some export versions, a laser rangefinder was not installed until 1985. In some cases, only the tanks of platoon commanders received them. After 1985, all standard-built T-72s came with reactive armor, a more powerful B-84 engine with 840 horsepower on board, and the main gun with a modernized design capable of firing guided anti-tank missiles from the barrel. These upgrades were able to put the T-72 on par with the newer T-80, but only a small number of these later versions made it to the economically disadvantaged Warsaw Pact allies and foreign customers prior to the collapse of the Soviet bloc. The T-72M and T-72M1 are Polish-made models, created under license by Bumar Labidi in Gliwice since 1982. Like earlier T-72s, the T-72M did not have side skirts. Instead, the model had gill-type armor panels on either side of the front of the hull. The T-72A was the first modification whose plastic side skirts covered the upper part of the suspension, and separate panels protected the sides of the fuel and glove boxes. After some time, the Polish T-72s also received 902W Tuka smoke grenade launchers at their disposal, and later production models even had an additional 16mm thick steel sheet welded on, as in the T-72M1 modification. While the Polish T-72M was identical to the basic T-72 in terms of protection, retaining a monolithic steel turret, the upgraded T-72M1 was closer to the T-72A in terms of protection. An additional 0.63 inches of high-density steel applique armor on the front plate resulted in a 1.7-inch increase of line-of-sight thickness. It was the first export variant with composite turret armor containing ceramic rods, sometimes referred to as sandbar armor. Before the Russian occupiers invaded, Ukraine was using a small number of Soviet T-72s that remained in service, modernizing them. In addition to this, after the start of the war, Poland provided Ukraine with 200 T-72s to further protect its sovereignty against the Russian takeover. The Czech Republic also joined in, transferring a certain amount of Soviet military equipment to the armed forces of Ukraine, both T-72s and BMP-1s. In return, Germany promised both countries that it would carry out the procedure necessary for replacing the given T-72s with Leopard tanks. However, according to the president of Poland, Andrzej Duda, the German authorities have still not come through on their promise. In response to this statement, German officials were greatly offended, stating that they needed more time. But Ukraine has been waiting for help from Germany for more than 3 months, and it's more than fair that other countries have also begun to wonder what German weapons will get to the front line. Speaking of Leopards, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Defense Minister Christine Lambrecht have, almost every week now, made statements about the transfer of various weapons to Ukraine. Unfortunately, only 7 Panzerhaubitze self-propelled guns can be spoken for from the entire list they'd announced. According to the German authorities, the soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine will soon finish training in the use of these self-propelled guns. Earlier on, Germany volunteered to provide Ukraine with modern Iris-T air defense systems to protect large cities, Cobra counter-battery radars, and even began negotiations with Greece on the supply of BMP-1s. However, the saddest thing about the letter is that Greece announced its readiness to transfer about 100 BMP-1 units to Ukraine only after Berlin sends the country the Marder BMPs they promised to replace. Apparently, the Greeks are not ready to put up with Germany's promises and follow in the footsteps of Poland, which is still waiting for its tanks. In April, the media began to circulate the news that the Rheinmetall concern was preparing to supply Ukraine with Leopard 1A5 tanks, since defense companies now have about 100 units of such tanks removed from service in the warehouses of defense companies. At the same time, the general director of the company, Armin Paperger, announced his readiness to share the equipment. At the time, he clarified that the German authorities should give permission for this supply. While the head of Rheinmetall puzzled the German authorities, Spain also gave cause for concern, declaring its readiness to provide Ukraine with Leopard 2 tanks and anti-aircraft missile systems, waiting only for approval from Berlin. Do I even need to say how this story ends? As a result, the transfer of 40 Leopard 2A4 tanks stored for 10 years at the logistics base with the Spanish army was blocked by the German authorities. These used tanks were purchased by Spain back in 1995 and have since been kept in excellent condition through regular maintenance. All of them are armed with a 120mm Rheinmetall smoothbore gun capable of firing 2 types of ammunition, including APF SDST and Heat MPT. It is further assisted by a coaxial 7.62mm machine gun mounted to the left of the main armament, a 7.62mm machine gun at the loader's hatch, and 2 rows of 4 grenade launchers mounted on each side of the tank turret. Of the significant changes in the modification of the Leopard 2A4, it is worth noting that it has automated fire extinguishing and explosion suppression system, a fully digital fire control system that facilitates the use of new types of ammunition, as well as an improved turret with flat titanium tungsten armor. Considered one of the best MBTs ever created, the Leopard 2 would be a worthy ally in fighting off the invaders, with which the armed forces of Ukraine are constantly fertilizing the Ukrainian soil. Unfortunately for now, we're still left with the question of how soon will the voice of the German people be heard by authorities and, in particular, by Mr. Scholz regarding their request to give Ukraine weapons. Despite the existence of so-called tacit agreements between NATO member countries not to supply tanks and combat aircraft to Ukraine, it's not too late for them to change their minds while the Russian invaders have yet to successfully expand their already enormous territory by trying to grab a piece of Europe. Everyone here has studied history before, yeah? France is one of those countries that supports Ukraine in the fight against Russian aggression by supplying weapons and humanitarian aid. At the same time, the country's president, Emmanuel Macron, like Olaf Scholz, continues to talk regularly with Russia's insane dictator. This happens so often that many politicians are jokingly suggesting that the heads of Germany and France be banned from talking to Moscow on the phone in the next round of sanctions. And if we're still talking about heavy weapons, then France may well transfer at least a couple of dozen of its famous Leclerc MBTs created by Giat Industries, now known as Nexter Systems. France, along with England, is rightfully the pioneer of armored warfare since the First World War, and by the beginning of World War II, this European country had even more tanks than Germany at the time. Additionally, they were better armed and had more effective armor, but they all fell victim to bad military doctrine. Before the advent of the South Korean K-2 Black Panther and the Japanese Type 10, the AMX-56 Leclerc was considered the most expensive MBT, and the cost of only one such tank by 2011 was $9.3 million, which is significantly more than even the cost of the improved M1A2 Abrams with a price tag of $7.56 million. In the early 2000s, against this background, some French military described it as a tank for which the people paid a fortune and which will never be used in combat. Generally speaking, such an opinion would be quite true if these multi-ton colossi had not demonstrated their effectiveness in Yemen, where the UAE threw 2 Leclerc divisions into the civil war. As a result, the AMX-56 turned out to be no less formidable in combat than the American M1 Abrams. One of the tank's unique features is its automatic loading system with a rate of fire of up to 15 rounds per minute, thanks to which the crew of the vehicle was reduced to 3 people, the commander, gunner, and driver. It also sported a 12.7mm M2HB QBC machine gun located coaxially with the main gun instead of next to the commander's hatch. Its F1 120mm smoothbore gun is slightly longer than the Abrams, therefore it can more effectively engage enemy armored vehicles by firing programmable high-explosive air blast fragmentation projectiles. Regarding the armor, the Leclerc loses slightly to the American MBT, since with the same frontal armor it has more weak points around the sensors, and instead of composite armor, it offers an unusual combination of composite, traditional, and dynamic armor, more effective against enemy tank kinetic projectiles. The side armor of the French tank is also worth noting since the new AMX-56 models have titanium armor inserts and blocks of high-explosive reactive armor on the sides, a kind of belt of explosives that detonate if incoming missiles and shells are detected. Due to the smaller turret profile than other MBTs and the ability to create a multi-spectral smokescreen, getting this tank is not such an easy task. When confronting opponents, the tank has, among other things, some infrared tricks up its sleeve too. However, the main bit is its weight of 60 tons, which is on average 10 tons lighter than most MBTs of even the strongest militaries, and a relatively high maximum speed of 45 miles per hour. Taking into account the fact that France has given the armed forces of Ukraine at least some 155mm Caesar self-propelled guns, pushing the invaders away from the front line, the likelihood of supplying heavier weapons in the form of battle tanks shouldn't be written off just yet. Against the backdrop of ardent criticism of the German authorities, one should not forget that the Ukrainian people today are friends with the strongest military countries of today, the United States and Great Britain. And where Germany cannot help, the existing lend-lease agreements will. In connection with the conflict's growing escalation and the growing territorial appetites of the occupying command, the U.S. General Staff is quite clearly aware of the consequences of the war in Ukraine if the armed forces of Ukraine do not receive heavy weapons in sufficient quantities. Therefore, in addition to the MLRS, tanks and fighters may soon be on the move as well. Among the tanks, the most likely would be the legend of American tank building, the previously mentioned M1 Abrams. Evolving from the joint American-German project MBT-70, but faced with financial costs, the U.S. Army revealed the XM803 tank to the world to replace their M60. However, it was soon canceled. Having revised goals and priorities, TACOM formed a new design base for its future tank, and in 1976, after a series of design changes, Chrysler and GM presented their prototypes, XM1. Shortly after extensive testing at U.S. test sites along with the Leopard 2 to identify the weaknesses and advantages of the design, the M1 Abrams entered service in 1980 and to this day has faithfully served as the main battle tank for the U.S. Army. Having gone through a harsh learning experience in the form of the campaign to liberate Kuwait from Iraqi occupation, the Iraq War, the war in Afghanistan, the invasion of Yemen, and a number of other operations, the Abrams have deservedly secured the title of being one of the most powerful tanks in history. While other countries focused on the external characteristics of their MBT, the United States devoted tens of thousands of hours to everything, including the inner stuffing of their creation. The latest Abrams include depleted uranium armor, digital upgrade package, parts commonality program, CROWS and CROWS 2 support, improved fire control system with commander's thermal imager and a laser rangefinder with a thermal camera for gunner, digital maps, communications capabilities via Linux Battle Command Brigade Force XX1, and below FB-CB2 for commanders, an improved cooling system to compensate for the heat generated by additional computer systems. Generally speaking, the description of all these innovations might give you the feeling that you're not actually in a tank, but rather in a server room with good air conditioning and hundreds of complex components, each of which is tuned for maximum efficiency and task fulfillment. All this goodness is dressed up in reliable front armor in the form of a multi-layered array up to 860mm thick, from 2 sheets of armor steel and a composite filler in between. Side armor on the turret made from an aluminum plate with an air layer and 3 19mm uranium ceramic plates. Soft kill active protection system, AM-VLQ-6 missile countermeasure device MCD, which interferes with the tracking systems of semi-automatic anti-tank missile systems. Who knows, maybe some of these tanks will end up in Ukraine later on, and there will be even more destroyed Russian scrap metal and its unfortunate crew in the country's fertile fields. And the last, but by no means least in our tank race, is Great Britain. Boris Johnson quickly made it clear which side he was on in this war, supporting the Ukrainian people in their outcast struggle against the Russian occupiers. Let's recall at least some of the impressive military assistance to Ukraine in the form of Mastiff armored vehicles, tracked Stormer HVMs, dozens of heavy Malloy T-150 UAVs, Starstreak air defense systems, thousands of NLAWs, Brimstone missiles, and other equally useful ammunition and tons of humanitarian aid. But one of the most useful packages from the UK might be the Challenger 2 tanks. The Challenger 2, or FV4034, is a British third-generation MBT, the successor to the Challenger 1, developed back in the 1990s. This 64-ton peacekeeper has proven its effectiveness on the battlefield during the invasion of Iraq. Unlike their French counterparts with Leclerc, the British decided not to trust the automatic loader in place of a person to carry out an important part of the mission. After rigorous testing, they came to the conclusion that automation reduces the survivability of the vehicle on the battlefield, and the main problems were the mechanical failures of such equipment and the time spent on their repair. Therefore, the requirements for a crew of 4 remained relevant. The Challenger 2 is protected by second-generation Chaubem armor, whose mass effectiveness against high-explosive anti-tank rounds is twice that of uniformed rolled armor. The primary concern with the design was the safety of the crew, so a semiconductor electric drive was used to move the turret and gun instead of hydraulics, which could pass fluid into the fighting compartment. The fangs of the Challenger 2 is its 120mm L30A 155 caliber cannon, the successor to the L11 mounted on the Chieftain and Challenger 1. The L30A1 stands out from other NATO MBT guns in that it has a rifled barrel. This is due to the continued preference of the British Army for the use of high-explosive fragmentation or HESH ammunition in addition to finned armor-piercing rounds. By the way, HESHs have a longer range than APF-SDS and are more effective against both thin-skinned vehicles and buildings. And let's not forget about the 7.62mm L94A1 EX34 machine gun mounted coaxially to the left of the main gun, nor the 7.62mm L37A2 placed on the loader hatch ring. Speaking of that, it's also worth noting not only the advanced digital computer from computing devices, but also the stabilized sight with built-in laser rangefinder, which boasts a range of anywhere from 660 feet to 6.2 miles. Then there's the passive periscope for the driver from Tails Optronics, with image enhancement for more convenient control and a rear-view thermal imaging camera. Claiming that their tank was superior to the Leopard 2 or the Abrams in some aspects, the Department of Defense opposed the purchase of a new MBT from abroad. And in March of 2021, the agency published the command document Defense in a Competitive Age, in which it confirmed plans to modernize 148 Challenger 2, assigning them the name Challenger 3. Looking at how quickly Britain volunteered to transfer the MLRS M270 to Ukraine on a par with the United States, it can be assumed that the country's consent will be no less if one of them decides to supply these beasts to Ukraine. What do you think? What kind of weaponry is Ukraine lacking in order to effectively cook these invaders to the point of being well done? Share your guesses in the comments below, and if you enjoyed today's video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and switch on notifications so you don't miss on more content just like this. Thanks, and we'll see you in the next one.
One of the main requests that the Ukrainian people and people around the world turned to NATO with was a request to provide cover for the sky over Ukraine. Since NATO doesn't want a direct confrontation with the Russian Federation, this request was ignored in the first days of the war. However, now everything points to the fact that the armed forces of Ukraine will, before long, be able to cover the sky over Ukraine on their own, thanks to the help of Western partners. In addition to air defense systems, there's also the possibility of transferring fighter jets to Ukraine, which should help resolve this issue. This is already being actively discussed. In today's video, we'll be talking about these iron birds and the benefits they can provide to the Ukrainian army. The aviation possessed by the Russian invaders turned out to be, to put it mildly, incompetent when it came to direct confrontation with experienced fighters of the armed forces of Ukraine. Even with a significant overbalance in the number of Russian aircraft, these invaders are nevertheless scared to death of the Ukrainian borders, although they continue to cowardly fire missiles at the civilian population of Ukraine and its infrastructure from within the safe territories of Russia and Belarus. Also pathetic were the statements made by the heads of the occupation forces and those court jesters of the Russian authorities, all of whom claimed that all Ukrainian aviation had been destroyed back in February. However, the facts of the matter have shown us that the armed forces of Ukraine's aircraft not only remain combat ready, but also regularly inflict colossal damage on the invaders, destroying their ammunition depots, equipment, and the manpower sent behind the Russian warship. After repeated requests from Ukrainian authorities and the military to equip them with American fighter jets, Republican congressman and former US Air Force pilot Adam Kinzinger offered to allocate funds for the training of Ukrainian pilots. Two UAF pilots, call signs Juice and Moonfish, spoke on Capitol Hill, as well as at the Pentagon, about the challenges they faced flying the MiG-29 in dogfights against more advanced enemy aircraft. They reiterated their appeal to the US government to help them acquire F-16s and get them trained. According to Yuri Ignat, a spokesman for the Ukrainian Air Force Command, it will take up to 6 months for pilot to swap out into new fighters, and most of this time will be spent on tactics and the use of new weapons. He also added that 2 F-16 squadrons of 12 aircraft with small reserves would be enough to destroy the occupiers' fighters even more effectively. At the same time, many of Ukraine's allies have repeatedly noted the amazing motivation displayed by the operators in the armed forces of Ukraine, and their ability to train several or even dozens of times faster than the scheduled pace. Juice had stated that he and his colleagues could learn to fly the F-16 in a few days, after which it would take several more weeks to learn how to handle weapons. Shortly thereafter, the House of Representatives approved an $840 billion FY 2023 defense budget that, among other things, provided for $1 billion in aid to Ukraine and took into account the Kinzinger Amendment to allocate $100 million to train UAF pilots to fly the F-15 and F-16. 50 years have passed since the moment when the F-15 first took to the skies. During this time, the Eagle managed to not only make itself known as one of the most successful fighters in US history, but also to set a combat record of 104 downed enemy aircraft without a loss. The early F-15s from McDonnell Douglas made almost every 4th-generation fighter jet in other countries think twice before engaging in a dogfight with the American aircraft. With 2 Pratt & Whitney F-100 PW-100 afterburner turbofans, capable of generating a whopping 23,500 pounds of thrust by the standards of that day, and the F-15 was so powerful it could break the speed of sound when flying straight up. And with a top speed of Mach 2.5 and advanced AN/APG-63 nose radar, the F-15 could even spot enemy aircraft flying at low altitudes up to 200 miles away. Eagle radars are the first to use a programmable system processor, allowing upgrades and improvements to be integrated without the need to replace hardware. Not too long after, this became one of the main features in even the latest F-35, which receives regular software updates to improve its overall performance. The F-15 successfully proved itself during fighting in the Middle East, the war in the Persian Gulf, Iraq, Libya, Yugoslavia, and other most grueling US military operations. The latest F-15EX, or Eagle II, is designed to replace the US Air Force's aging F-15C fleet, and promises to be an incredibly powerful and economical aircraft. The fighter can carry a payload of 12 air-to-air missiles, or 15 air-to-ground missiles, which is 4 times that of the F-35, all while maintaining stealth. It also has the latest integrated electronic warfare system. The US Air Force even plans to link its stealth F-35s to missile platforms, in the form of the F-15EX, via a secure data link for maximum effectiveness on the battlefield. Having promptly received data from these invisible setups about the location of enemies, the F-15EX will immediately step into action, firing dozens of missiles from a great distance. Don't get me wrong, stealth is amazing. But almost 30,000 pounds of ammunition on the pylons of a fighter jet, whistling at twice the speed of sound, will definitely throw the enemy into full-blown hysteria. And now, it's time to move on to its big brother. Like any 4th-generation American fighter, the F-16 Fighting Falcon was created taking into account the experience of the US Air Force in Vietnam. The US Air Force needed an agile, light fighter, capable of being a good alternative to heavy and complex fighters like the F-4 Phantom, F-14 Tomcat, and the previously mentioned F-15 Eagle. This idea quickly found its response in the command and funding from the authorities, resulting in the lightweight fighter LWF program. Back in 1972, 2 teams remained out of 6 manufacturers participating in the competitive selection. General Dynamics with its model 401-16B, and the Northrop P600, which later transformed into YF-16 and YF-17. Both of them weighed about 20,000 pounds unladen, which was much lighter than a 28,000-pound F-15 and much less than a 40,000-pound F-14. As a result, the F-16 from General Dynamics, which had better maneuverability, greater flight range, and most importantly a lower cost than the YF-17, was declared the undisputed winner of the competition. However, the latter also found its place elsewhere in the service. It became the basis of the future F/A-18 Hornet of the US Navy. The F-16 received only one engine, unlike its predecessor, the F-15, but in return it got advanced aerodynamics and avionics, including, for the first time, an integrated flight control system with relaxed static stability, RSS, and fly-by-wire, FBW, for improved maneuverability. Due to its high maneuverability, the Fighting Falcon was the first fighter designed to perform maneuvers with an overload of 9G, and a maximum speed of more than Mach 2. Among other innovations, it's worth noting the frameless bubble canopy and joystick, now located on the side rather than in the center, like the Soviet MiG-29, Su-25, and other fighters in service with Ukraine and other Eastern European states. In addition to the M61 Vulcan cannon mounted inside the fuselage to the left of the cockpit, the early F-16s were armed with 6 AIM-9 Sidewinder short-range heat-seeking AAM air-to-air missiles and medium-range radar-guarded AIM-7 Sparrow missiles. Newer modifications have facilitated support for the AIM-120 AMRAAM, which resourceful American pilots have since begun to install on the wingtips to further reduce aircraft flutter. In addition to the missiles already mentioned, the F-16 can carry other AAMs, a wide range of air-to-ground missiles, rockets or bombs, weapons containers, or fuel tanks on 9 hardpoints. Of these, 6 are under the wings, 2 are at the wingtips, and 1 under the fuselage. For now, F-16 production is still in full swing at Lockheed Martin's factories in South Carolina, and the US Air Force has extended its F-16's flight hours to 12,000. Therefore, we'll be able to see the F-16 in the sky even more, at least until the end of the 2030s. Additionally, the command's desire to have the MRX multi-purpose stealth fighter as a replacement for its Fighting Falcon fleet hasn't disappeared altogether, even after the appearance of brand new F-35s. Interest in updating proven platforms such as the F-15 and F-16 may well revive the underdeveloped F-16XL Delta Wing prototype, which has twice the payload. So what's the bottom line then? We have 2 time-honored, adaptable American fighters with dozens of modifications that are still being improved even today. But apparently, serious talk about Ukraine receiving one or even several groups of such aircraft won't begin until autumn. At the same time, let's not forget about the other allies of this European country, which supply it with spare parts for the aircraft already in service. According to media reports, it was thanks to the timely supply of various parts that the armed forces of Ukraine managed to replenish their fleet with 20 Soviet fighters. And although the senior US official who broke the news didn't specify which country transferred the spare parts, Poland and Slovakia have repeatedly offered to transfer their MiG-29s to Ukraine in exchange for American F-16s. Also, parts for the MiG-29 were found in the recently released list of the Bundeswehr assistance to Ukraine. But given the Germans' bureaucracy, the local authorities would hardly have time to send the parts on such short notice, in parallel with the transfer of the PZH-2000 self-propelled guns and other types of military assistance from Germany. After some time, information appeared that Poland had nevertheless transferred to Ukraine close to its entire reserve of materials for the MiG-29. And now, the armed forces of Ukraine have the opportunity to restore the combat capability of their Iron Birds on an ongoing basis. The MiG-29 has been the main multi-role fighter aircraft for the Warsaw Pact countries and the USSR since the 1980s. The MiG-29's armament includes a single 30mm GSH-31 cannon, set in the left wing with an initial magazine load of 150 rounds, now reduced to 100, thus allowing only a few seconds of fire before running out. After the release of the serial MiG-29I, it turned out that it could not shoot from a cannon with a fuel tank in the center, since it blocked the projectile's ejection port. Engineers managed to correct this defect in the MiG-29C and subsequent versions. The aircraft has 6 or 8 pylons, 3 or 4 under each wing, depending on modification, as well as internal mounts carrying a 300-gallon fuel tank, 1 Vimpel R-27, AA-10 Alamo, medium-range air-to-air missile, or unguided bombs or rockets. Some Soviet MiG-29s could also carry a nuclear bomb, but oftentimes the outer pylons carry R-73 AA-11 Archer or older R-60 AA-8 Aphid air-to-air missiles. According to assurances given by USSR authorities and the factory team that created this aircraft, its maneuverability was not much inferior to the F-18 and F-16. But the small fuel supply allowed it to carry out only short-range air defense tasks. The lack of the HOTAS system and the inter-aircraft data link, as well as the highly complicated work in the cockpit, simply did not allow even experienced pilots to use most of the fighter's capabilities on par with their foreign colleagues. And although Ukraine did not have an extensive fleet of MiG-29s, most of them were still modernized and put into combat condition. The Russian Ministry of Defense admitted back in 2009 that about 200 of the 300 MiG-29s in service wouldn't be able to take off due to tail corrosion. It turns out that the Russian occupiers had handled the disposal of their own military equipment rather well, even before the start of the war with Ukraine. As of July 20th, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported 220 destroyed aircraft from the occupational forces side. Therefore, we can say with confidence that even though only Su-25, Su-27, and MiG-29 fighters were present, this did not prevent the pilots in the armed forces of Ukraine from forcing the enemy to run away with their tail tucked between their legs. How soon do you think Ukraine will be able to acquire the F-15 and F-16? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell for more content like today's. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.